My Superman review. Spoilers ahead. I'll start at the end first. I thought there was good momentum going into the final act. It's a very fast-paced movie as it is, but I felt the climax tied up the story quite well by the end. But throughout the film, the level of depth in the characters is quite shallow. Rachel Brosnahan as Lois Lane was the most interesting character to me, the most three-dimensional. And I like how she drove the story forward with her investigative work with Jimmy Olsen, but also working with the Justice Gang. And I will say the Justice Gang, they don't really get much explanation for their backstory or how they're there. They're just in the movie. Right? They're just there. Mr. Terrific probably gets the most development purely based on his screen time and the solid performance by Eddie Gathegi. It does feel as though the story in this film is mostly driven by the action scenes, of which there are a lot, rather than the action being driven by story. Superman is fighting monsters here and there, and I get the impression that the action scenes were devised prior to a story being created to justify them. That's the kind of vibe I got. As a James Gunn movie, it has that very annoying and tiresome feature of characters speaking to each other with a very rapid fire delivery, that kind of witty banter with very few breaths or pauses to consider things. It's very Guardians of the Galaxy in that way. And unfortunately, it does suffer from the Marvel-esque humour of undercutting emotionally tense and serious moments with cheap gags. And for me, I have to say, very little of the humour worked. It's nothing that I haven't seen before. Speaking of which, in the climax, Superman delivers his big speech, and then Luthor responds, and he's talking to Superman about how the government wants him to kill him and whatever. And it's all very dramatic and rah-rah. And then suddenly, that tension is broken by a joke, which is Krypto, who jumps on Luthor and starts throwing him around the room and injures him. And it's supposed to be shocking and funny. And I literally groaned in the way my post-40s self groans every time I bend down to pick up something off the floor. Ugh. Because this is the exact same joke that Joss Whedon did with Hulk when he smashes Loki mid-speech in Avengers. It's the exact same joke. So yeah, the CGI is okay in places, but mostly I found it pretty poor, especially in the anti-proton river scene. That there's a fight in this anti-proton river, and it's just the CG is actually worse in some places than Flash CGI, right? So yeah, not good. The film isn't politically biased in any way, I'm glad to say. Mercifully, we're spared any agenda there. However, this film doesn't depict men and masculinity in a very positive light for me. David Corenswet is very likable in this movie. Incidentally, I was very surprised he only plays Clark Kent for one scene. And while it's certainly nice to see Superman focus on, moral issues, he's lacking confidence at times and also not commanding the kind of respect, dignity, and aura that Superman typically should. This is not the Christopher Reeve Superman who embodied a real gravitas and masculine presence in the role. Corenswet has a great presence and charisma of his own, but his character is let down by the decision to make Superman a damsel all too often, and he doesn't really get to definitively save the day by himself. He needs a lot of help in this movie from the Justice Gang, but also he needs a lot of help in general, including from the dog Krypto. And I feel Gunn was trying to make this a kind of Guardians ensemble movie in that regard. Superman has to get rescued multiple times in the movie. He gets beaten up a lot. I'm not even sure. We don't really see him at his best. Do you know what I mean? And I'm not even sure he was the strongest person in the film. And, I don't think that's a good thing for a Superman movie. He wasn't alpha male enough. But Hollywood in recent years considers masculinity to be toxic and all that. So, Superman was going to be lacking in that area. I didn't like the final speeches at the end of the movie. In retrospect, Superman kind of comes across as like a victim of bullying who's trying to stand up for himself, and he's trying to make himself sound stronger than he is when he's in fact falling apart inside. Right? The great thing about Superman was that in the end, he would always rise above Luthor to show him that ultimately he could never really break his spirit. And I didn't buy his speech at the end. It was more like Mr. Super Sensitive. I get scared. I watch Pride and Prejudice with my girlfriend. We drink wine and cry. We give each other pedicures. I clean the house while wearing her pink fluffy slippers. And that's my greatest strength. I thought diversity was the greatest strength. But anyway, also I don't want to see Lex Luthor break down and cry when he doesn't get his way, which is what happens in this movie. He's like a Silicon Valley psycho tech bro bad guy who never fully matured or something, you know? And again, this is the issue with masculinity in these kinds of films. Whether it's the good guy or the bad guy, they don't seem to know how to write male stoicism and the true complexity of masculinity. They think that all men are just a hair's breadth away from throwing an emotional temper tantrum and behaving like hormonal teenagers. Now, what about instead? A Lex Luthor who was a cold, dead behind the eyes psychopath who didn't feel anything. That's much more terrifying because you don't know where you stand with someone like that. It's very unnerving. To give you an example, in the final book and also episode of Agatha Christie's Poirot, Curtain, you have the psychopath Stephen Norton. He's played brilliantly by Aidan McArdle. And he is incredibly creepy and relentless because you cannot relate to him because he's a psycho and very cerebral. He's very intelligent. And that's a great model for a very disturbing and understated nemesis. And I think he should be a template for how to write a subtle and truly evil villain to the point where he is demonic. And he is far more sophisticated than any arch mustache twirling shouty bad guy who gets angry and smashes things. Lex Luthor is evil in this film, but he's not scary. Stephen Norton was utterly terrifying, but that was great writing. Nicholas Hoult is a great actor. I really liked him in Tolkien. He was brilliant, and he does wonders with what he's given here. But ultimately, Luthor in this film is just as one-dimensional as all the other characters. There's just no depth beyond a few emotions and the actors' performances. And it's as though this was written with the idea that if you just give a character a lot of screen time, that somehow equates to character development, which it doesn't. Superman and Lois Lane and Lex Luthor get the most screen time, but that doesn't mean they get the kind of development that they really needed. And the relationship between Superman and Lois is really only a handful of scenes. In fact, their romantic relationship could have gone either way. They could have broken up or stayed together. They stay together in the end, but nothing would have really been lost because you don't care enough about the two of them being together. Because there wasn't enough meat on the bones in the first place. Why? Because there was not enough room in 2 hours to fully flesh out their relationship because of all of the action and all of the characters that are utterly crammed into this movie. And speaking of one-dimensional, and I think this illustrates my point very well, Superman's parents, his adopted human parents that is, Martha and Jonathan Kent. I don't know who they are in this film. We got to know Diane Lane's Martha and Kevin Costner's Jonathan Kent in Man of Steel very well. They were fully fleshed out people. They had wisdom and presence to them. Likewise, on Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, we really got to know Kay Callan's version of Martha and Eddie Jones' version of Jonathan very well indeed. They were all warm, lovable, kind, generous, intelligent, supportive, and patient parental figures. The kinds of people you'd want your parents to be. But the Martha and Jonathan in this film are just two quirky, simple country bumpkins with strong, barely comprehensible country accents. And their hickness is kind of played for laughs, which just devalues them. Yes, Jonathan, played by Pruitt Taylor Vince, does deliver that speech, "Your actions, your choices, that's what makes you who you are, Clark. And I tell you now, son, I couldn't be prouder." It's like, "Our lives are the sum of our choices, Ethan." Thank you, Kittredge. I mean, Dad. It's all very familiar, isn't it? Hollywood echoing itself once again. But this heartfelt moment between father and son does feel kind of generic and samey and empty because I don't know anything about their relationship and their past other than what I already know and presuppose based on these characters from other Superman films and TV shows. Now, before you give me grief in the comments, there's no need. Don't worry about it. I envy you if you loved this movie. Because it is very polarizing, you have to understand. I mean, just look at the reaction it's getting. There's people who have problems with it. There's people who really didn't like it. And there's a lot of people who loved it. And I have changed my mind on this movie after watching it, obviously. I don't feel like I got anything out of it that I didn't already see in the trailers. Now, Man of Steel, Zack Snyder's Man of Steel from 2013, which has way better CGI than this, by the way. It's not for everyone, but it is a serious movie. It takes everything about Superman and all of the characters very seriously, and it handles Superman in a very dignified way. This film does not. I guess you could say it's a family movie, it's a kid's movie, albeit, and this is a caveat here, there's occasional swearing. It's mild enough and rare, but to be fair, there was a time when kids' movies didn't have any swearing at all. But, you know, incrementalism over the years, gradually, this has crept into kids' movies, and I think parents have become numb and almost blind to it. Well, I personally, I'm an old fuddy-duddy, so I don't think it's appropriate. But it is goofy, it's very cartoonish, it doesn't take itself too seriously, and it doesn't offer any real depth beyond some tacked-on speeches at the end. And I will say, I actually am one of the people, I'm in the minority here, I didn't have a problem with Superman's lore being changed, as other people did, which is to say the revelation that his real parents sent him to Earth with the instruction to conquer the place. I thought that was actually an interesting take, and made for an interesting personal conflict for Superman to grapple with. But again, it's not explored enough, and in fact, I think there was a missed opportunity in this regard because they could have delved more into the theme of nature versus nurture with a view towards Superman trying to resolve this conflict by helping Ultraman, his evil clone that's in the movie, to reject the programming that Luthor had given him and to choose a better path rather than just physically defeating Ultraman. By turning Ultraman to the good side, Superman could have learned that a man's choices define him better than his nature, but they didn't do that. I will say, I think this film will do very well. It is being very well received by average moviegoers who just want popcorn good times. And I think this film delivers that. So they're going to love this. And they're not going to dwell too much on the finer details as I have in this review. And most people are going to be thinking that I'm nitpicking, but hey, you don't click on my videos to hear me give you bland platitudes or necessarily tell you what you want to hear. You're going to get more of a contrarian view from me. But if you liked this movie, you're luckier than I am. Right? And consider yourself lucky in that regard. I would give this a 6.5 out of 10. I think it could have been worse, it could have been better. It's creating a lot of chatter online in fan circles. I think that's a good thing. I have to wonder, did we need another Superman movie? We've had plenty of them over the years. DC obviously feels they need to reboot it every so often after all the characters going into the public domain in just 9 years' time. But there you go. Those are my thoughts on James Gunn's Superman. Let me know yours in the comments below. And yes, Donner's version will always be the gold standard. Take care. I will see you next time. Bye-bye.